right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. So some of you may know Dr. Michael Good from his medical practice, and some of you from seeing him around town. He attended the University of Rochester School of Medicine. He completed his residency in family medicine at Middlesex Hospital in 1986, and he practiced medicine for 40 years before retiring in 2023. Personally, as a home care nurse, I can attest to how much his patients still miss him. Dr. Good has lived on Haddam Quarter Road in Durham since 1992. And before we welcome Dr. Good, does everybody know where the bathrooms are? Down here? Okay, we got exits that way. Any questions before we start? Okay. Seatbelt? Yeah. We gotta go that far, we're in trouble. Okay, so please help me in welcoming Dr. Good.
Well, good afternoon. It's so nice to see so many friends and neighbors here, especially the Chase Newton family who made this talk possible. As you folks may surmise, I live on Haddam Quarter Road in Durham, and as I've had the chance to explore the history of my neighborhood, I found that looking back at the lives of previous residents who lived really within 100 yards of me, it can really teach us a lot about life and death. It's not in the all too distant past that people were largely at the mercy of a wide array of maladies and illnesses, a fact that made life very fragile and all too often short. In this talk, we'll look at the lives of 3 young residents of Haddam Quarter Road during the period of 1886 through 1913. Elizabeth Foote Newton, her son Charlie, and their cousin Catherine Huntington Newton. Through their stories, learn about scourges of the past, such as tuberculosis, pneumococcal pneumonia, and even vehicular trauma. And we'll see how diseases that are routinely treated today were beyond the ability of physicians just 100 years ago to cure. So here we have an aerial view of the neighborhood. Coming from the top of the picture down is Arbutus Street, and it runs into Haddam Quarter in the middle of the screen. And Haddam Quarter runs over to Maiden Lane, and I live on the corner of Maiden Lane and Haddam Quarter, and then Maiden Lane comes down to meet Main Street just across the street from the Durham Market. Here's a view of my house on the corner of Maiden Lane and Haddam Quarter. And every morning for many years I would trot across my driveway and try not to fall if there was black ice, and get my newspaper. But one winter, when all the leaves were down, I could see that just a few yards behind my mailbox was an old stone foundation. And I started wondering, where in the world lived behind my mailbox? So I went over to my neighbor, Catherine Chase Newton, and she told me that her Uncle J.E. lived in the house on that spot, and that's what the house looked like, and that he had lived in this house with his wife Elizabeth and son Charlie from the 1880s until his death in 1935. So this house was built over the original Newton homestead, which had actually dated back to 1724. And after J.E.'s death, it remained unoccupied and was finally taken down in a controlled burn by the Durham Fire Department in the late 1950s. Catherine showed me that across the street there was another stone wall, and she said that that used to be J.E.'s barn. And this barn was also there until the late 1950s. And this is a picture of the barn in 1958. And here's a photo of J.E. Newton himself and his wife Lizzie and their young son Charlie. Now down the road, about 100 yards from J.E., was J.E.'s brother, Arthur, and his family living in the house that the Newton family moved into in 1803. Here we can see Arthur and his wife Mary, and between them is young Catherine Huntington Newton. On the right is Roger Rossiter Newton, who was 6 years younger than Catherine. And on Arthur's lap is a young Gaylord Newton, who I think some of the people in this room probably knew. How many people knew Gaylord in this room? So he's a very, very prominent and beloved member of the Durham community. So there he is with his family. Now, fortunately, for those of us who've come along all these years later, especially newcomers like me, Catherine Newton Chase has preserved a vast array of letters, postcards, journals, and photos, which had resided for more than a century in her ancestral home's attic. And I'd like to acknowledge Catherine, who without her stewardship, this talk, and as well as a lot of other interesting history, never would have come to light. But she went up into her parents' attic and found releases full of letters, more letters, journals, diaries, and they go back as far as 1709. And these amazing records allow us to travel back 300 years to get a glimpse of the day-to-day joys and hardships of life on Haddam Quarter Road in Durham. And in particular, for this short talk, we're going to talk a little bit about the medical maladies that afflicted this family and all too often took folks well before their time. So we're going to start talking about tuberculosis. Now, I'm going to warn you to sort of steel yourselves a little bit, because we're going to be reading directly from some of the family letters that they're writing to each other, and they're describing the difficulty that their loved ones were going through, and if we're strong, we'll get through it. That's, got to look at history with a clear eye. Jonathan Edward was born in 1847, and he worked right on the farm on Haddam Quarter Road, and he married Elizabeth Foote in 1897. And 7 years later, she gave birth to a son, Charles Newton. However, shortly after giving birth to Charlie, Elizabeth began to suffer from symptoms of consumption, as tuberculosis was called at the time. And after 2 years of decline, J.E. took Elizabeth to a sanitarium near Chestertown, New York, in the Adirondacks, for the latest treatments that they offered, namely wholesome food and fresh air. For a long time, people didn't know what caused consumption. They just knew that people got sick and lost weight and had trouble breathing and had a large number of maladies, but they didn't understand that it was an infectious disease. But they did observe that people in urban slums did worse than people in the country. And so the feeling was that it must be the fresh country air that makes it so that the country folk do better than the city folk. Now, by the time J.E. And Elizabeth were battling this disease. It had become understood in 1882 was when the tuberculin bacillus was discovered by Edward Koch. But even though they knew it was an infectious disease, they still didn't have any new treatments other than good nutrition and fresh air. And these treatments were established at a place called Saranac Lake in the Adirondacks of New York by a man named Dr. Edward Trudeau. And he made these sanitariums, and they tended to really concentrate on exposing the patients to cold, dry air on something called a Trudeau porch. So we can see all these TB sufferers being bundled up in the freezing cold on this Trudeau porch so that they can get aired out. So J.E. would write regular letters from the sanitarium back home to give people a description of what they were experiencing. So the first one is from November 5th, 1888. Quote, it would neither be prudent or wise for me to leave E as she is at present. I hope she may gain faster this week than heretofore. It always takes her a long time to recover lost ground. She rested nicely last night and is feeling quite comfortable this morning. January 6th, 1889. Dear Father, Elizabeth, my beloved wife, under favorable influences mentioned, has improved somewhat in the past 3 days. Today has been her best day of the past 10, but the first 7, I must admit, were trying days to us both, and we once more thrice welcomed the day star of hope as he again rises above the horizon. Friday and Saturday, Elizabeth was taken outside in a toboggan for an hour each day. Her room was thoroughly fanned by the mountain breezes, and the in-wafting air seemed to increase her appetite the 1/100th part of a centimeter. Thankful for this little gain and for a little return of her voice, I shall endeavor to carry out this treatment for as long as any benefit is perceptible. So, you could just imagine, people who have TB get what we in medicine call cachexia. They turn sort of skeletal, they're sort of thin. So here you have this thin woman with no fat on her bones left, and they're bundling her up on a toboggan and dragging her through the snowy woods to try to air her out. And poor J.E., he's so desperate. He loves his wife so much, and he's so desperate that he's hoping that he can perceive, 1/100th of a centimeter of improvement in her appetite. And so you can really feel the heartache for people as they watch their family members slowly be devoured by this bacteria. Now, Elizabeth's mother, Selena Foote, joined J.E. and brought their 2-year-old son, Charlie, up from Durham to be near his mother and to help support her son-in-law, J.E. And she writes the following harrowing accounts of her daughter's illness. Chestertown, February 14th, 1889. Dear Miss Newton, it is now 9:30 a.m., and Elizabeth is sitting in a rocker, which is quite unusual for her at this early hour. But she gets so tired of the bed, it is a relief to get into the chair, and soon is so tired of the chair that it is a relief to return. She has lain so continuously of late that the skin is very tender over the shoulder blades, hip bones, etc., and though we rub freely with alcohol, it alleviates but does not wholly cure. Is there anything better than that for bathing known to you? She loses a great deal of sleep through restlessness, nervousness, coughing, etc., so we are obliged to resort to some opiate frequently required. She also sweats at times, quite profusely. I'm sure I've not given you an attractive picture, but it is before our eyes constantly. A few days later, she describes some of the most fearful of travails as her daughter experiences acute delirium and agitation due to the effects of the illness and the drugs. Chestertown, February 20th, 1889. Elizabeth's condition has been more dreadful beyond anything we've experienced before. The pain and suffering in lungs and side and neuralgia and weakness everywhere seem as nothing compared to the inflammation of the brain and its consequent disorder of the mind. But I will not dwell upon it. Thank God there is some relief, though not perfect. Around noon yesterday, she fell asleep. On many occasions, it would be better to be home now, yet Edward is so thankful that her nearest friends are spared the pain of witnessing the scenes of the last few days, and the remembrance of her will not be clouded by this mental trouble. I'm very glad to be here now and share the cares and sorrows with Edward. The poor man is just as faithful as ever in striving to do everything possible for her restoration or comfort while she remains. So I think by this time it was clear to everybody that, she was not going to recover. Here's another letter from J.E. to his brother. Sunday evening, March 24th, 1889. Now remember, we started in November, and they've been at her bedside for all these months. Monday, Lizzie had a pretty hard night. Such fearful hard work to raise. Sometimes it's as if she would use her up entirely. Father remembers how hard it was for him to raise when he had the pneumonia. Lizzie's will beat that and keep up all night. She's troubled very much for breath at times, and breathing is hard most of the time. It is wonderful how she holds out. She would be able to talk with any of you quite a little this morning if you were here. She is very thin indeed, and I cannot see where the matter she raises comes from. There appears to be very little probability of her ever seeing her home again. Still, we are doing our best to have her hold on. Lizzie sends her love to you all, especially to Dampa, and we all unite. Tuesday morning, March 26th. Elle is still with us, but no improvement. Strength evidently falling, but mind more quiet. I'm doing all we can, but without expectation of relief. Please notify Father M. J.E. So Elizabeth died the next morning, and she was 31 years of age. And you can find her gravestone here in the cemetery right behind us, City Hall. It's hard for us to conceive that late in the 19th and earliest 20th century, almost 10% of all the deaths in Connecticut were due to TB. By its peak in the late 1800s, it was a scourge of Europe and North America, killing children, devastating families, and sapping the strength of the newly industrialized societies. During these times, a diagnosis of TB carried a 50% death rate over 5 years. And even survivors were prone to reoccurrences, which greatly diminished their ability to lead active lives for the remainder of their days. The Mycobacterium tuberculosis genus originated, like its human host, in East Africa. And it's likely that it infected early hominids, and it followed human migration out of Africa into the Middle East and across Europe and Asia. Its skeletal manifestations, known as Pott's disease, are very characteristic on X-ray and have been found in Egyptian mummies dating back over 5,000 years, and written texts describe tuberculosis in India 3,300 years ago and in China 2,800 years ago. It's not known exactly when TB arrived in the Americas, but Peruvian mummies from 900 AD show the distinct skeletal lesions of TB in their spines. An examination of mummies showed that 500 years before the arrival of Columbus, TB had reached pandemic proportions, affecting 10 to 25% of the Andean population that was studied between 900 and 1000 AD. And it's actually speculated that the American TB pandemic may have been the source of the European outbreak in the late 17th century. So we brought measles and smallpox here. They gave us, the natives here gave us syphilis and TB that we brought back to Europe. A little revenge. Now, the source of TB remained a mystery for most of human history until Robert Koch discovered and isolated the Mycobacterium bacillus in 1882. And once the bacterial source of the disease was established, Western societies began to institute public health measures to deal with the contagion. So public health campaigns began, which warned of the dangers of spitting in public, as well as instructions to caregivers of the sick, instructing how to diagnose infectious secretion, how to dispose of infectious secretions of ill. So here we can read some of their instructions. Beware of the careless spitter. Don't spit, save lives. Who loves a spitter? Men, it's up to us. Spitting spreads disease. And women, don't spit. Protect the children, don't spit. Spitting spreads disease. Now, TB patients were encouraged to go to specialized facilities for their care. There were dispensaries for the poor, and sanitariums and spas for the more wealthy. While no specific treatment had been devised, placing patients in sanitariums served to isolate them from their families and prevent the spread of disease. Additionally, patients were subjected to strict hygiene, fresh air, and most importantly, nutritious diets. For patients with milder disease, this was shown to improve the outcomes. In 1923, we still didn't have any medications that could treat TB. But a study of 4,000 patients in 1923 showed that for mild patients, only 18% of them would die over the next 5 years, where 34% of the people who stayed at home would die within 5 years. So just having good hygiene, good nutrition to give the body enough good nutrition to fight this deadly disease cut the death rate in half. So we may not have had antibiotics, but we were making progress. We were trying to control the spread, don't spit, and isolate the sufferers from the extended family and give them good nutrition. Started in Europe by the Prussian physician, Dr. Hermann Bremer, a sanitarium movement began for the treatment of TB, offering a rest cure with clean air, rest, and good nutrition. And here, Dr. Edward Trudeau, himself a recovering TB sufferer, established the first sanitarium in Saratoga Lake, New York. And one of his early patients was Robert Louis Stevenson, and this famous patient's recovery helped propel the sanitarium movement's popularity across America. So following Trudeau's leads, sanitariums and smaller cure cottages sprang up throughout the Adirondacks, with thousands of sufferers traveling from around the country to get the latest, most scientific treatment for this dreaded disease. J.E. and his wife Lizzie were staying in Chestertown, New York, about 70 miles from Trudeau's famous institute on Saratoga Lake. Now, a major vector for the spread of TB, both in urban and in rural areas, was TB-contaminated milk. It was established in 1917 that 1 in 20 milk cows in the United States was infected with TB. And this led to widespread childhood infections, which either led to immediate illness and death of children or to latent non-pulmonary TB. So TB, you can either inhale it and get it in your lung, which is what we most commonly see now, that the food supply is cleaned up, But when you swallow TB, you could get TB in your intestines, in your lymph node. It could seed up to your brain. It could go really anywhere in the body, in your bones. So there were two measures that were taken to defend against this threat. First, the pasteurization of milk, and also the testing of all cattle with the tuberculous skin test. Infected livestock were removed from their herds, and here we have a photo of a veterinary kit for TB testing for cattle from the 1930s. Which brings us back to our story of J.E. Newton, who after the loss of his beloved wife, Elizabeth, spent the next 45 years farming on Haddam Quarter Road. While many farmers used horses for their farm work, J.E. used a pair of oxen who helped him with work on every corner of the farm. These were huge, prized animals that in many ways were J.E.'s constant companions in making a life on a hard scrabble New England farm. Now this young boy standing next to these huge beasts was Bobby Newton, who many of us knew and who just passed a couple of years ago. There's Bobby helping his Uncle Ed out. However, in 1934, J.E.'s oxen tested positive for TB, and they were taken away. Family members report that without his oxen companions, 88-year-old J.E. had nothing more to live for and died within a year of their departure. And this is a picture of J.E. standing on top of a little hill at Haddam Quarter Road before it turns down into Maiden Lane. Okay, let's turn to surgery. It may surprise you, I don't think this section is as gruesome as the one I just took you through. Okay, so Charlie Newton was born in 1886, shortly before his mother began to exhibit symptoms of tuberculosis. He and his father lived on their farm on Haddam Quarter Road. By 1904, he was a senior at Middletown High School and traveled each school day to Middletown via horse and buggy with his two cousins from down the street, 12-year-old Catherine Huntington Newton and 10-year-old Roger Rossiter Newton. So here we see Charlie in front of the wagon with his two cousins in it. They happen to have some young steers attached to the wagon. Most of the time when they went to school, it was a horse. Catherine and Roger's mother, Mary, describes a routine at the beginning of the school year in her journal in September 1904. Catherine commenced her course at Middletown High School September 13th. She rode in with Charles Watson, who drives a new horse, Minnie by name, which he and his father brought home from Maroonless yesterday. Catherine takes physical geography, rhetoric, algebra, and Latin. They plan to start around 7:15 a.m. and reach home about 2:15 if they have nothing to delay them. Roger commenced grammar school September 19th. Teacher a Mrs. Carman of Hignum. Arithmetic, review in percentage and interest. He rides in with Charles and Kay and is through at 12:15 when a good boy. The children all seem to enjoy the ride very much. The happiest school going they ever can have, we believe. Now, 12-year-old kept a diary, and in her entry from September 30th, 1904, she tells what transpired on the way home from school. September 30th, 1904. And they always start their diary entries with a description of the weather. A beautiful day. Charlie, Roger, and I went to school, but coming home, Minnie got the line under her tail and started to run. Charlie tried to pull her up, but she clinched her tail on the line and kicked up, but did not throw out her feet. Her hoofs came up as high as the whiffle tree. Then Charlie loosened the line under her tail, but did not loosen the other. And Minnie swerved into the car track, talking about the trolley car track that ran along the road between Middletown and Durham. Swerved into the car track, and two wheels struck at once. The other two were thrown into the air by the shock, and Charlie was thrown out. I grabbed the lines when Charlie dropped them and loosened them both. She turned on our road of her own accord, and finally I got the line out from under her tail. And Roger and I pulled her up. She stopped at the end of the car track on our road. Two teams came after us, and a man from the ice house drove her back, and we ran back to where Charlie was thrown. He had struck the corner of the platform, that's the trolley car platform, and has a very bad cut under his chin, about an inch long. Mr. B. Turner telephoned for the doctor, but could only find Dr. Mitchell. The doctor said one rib was broken, and he might be injured internally. Charlie wanted to go home, and the ambulance was sent for. After Charlie left, Miss Hull of Durham came along in a team with 3 others in it. She stopped and stayed with Charlie till the ambulance came. I rode out in the ambulance with Charlie, and Roger rode out with the doctor. On the way home, Charlie's shoulder began to hurt him. When we got home, the doctor examined him carefully and said he had a sprained shoulder and a broken rib. But he thought he was not injured internally. Mama stayed over there till night, and Papa went to Northford to get Grandpa. Uncle George came out at night and stayed till Papa got home, which he did around 10 o'clock. Saturday, October 1st, 1904. A pleasant day. Charlie suffers some and says his bandages are tight. The doctor came out today and says he's getting along as well as he can. He has been stomach sick considerably today. Sunday, October 2nd, 1904. A fair day. Uncle Ed came over early this morning and said Charlie was much worse and it with a high fever. Papa went to Middletown for Dr. Mitchell, who came. When he got here, the fever was gone, and he was pleased with Charlie's condition. Roger and I went to church. Uncle George was at Charlie's all night. Monday, October 3rd, 1904. Papa was over at Uncle Ed's last night, and Charlie felt so bad that he went for the doctor at 9 o'clock. The doctor thinks now that he must be hurt internally and is going to come out with another doctor and Mr. McKnight of Hartford sometime today. Roger and I went to school and got home around 2 o'clock. The 2 doctors had come, and Dr. Loveland and a nurse besides. When the doctors got here, Charlie's hands and feet were cold, and they said he could not live but for a few hours at most unless he had an operation. And even then, there was not much of a chance of his recovery. Charlie himself was consulted. He gave farewell messages to all his friends and said, try the operation. He died while they were performing it shortly after 2 o'clock. Thursday, October 6, 1904. It rained hard during the night, but cleared up this afternoon. Charlie's funeral was held at 2:30 o'clock, and a great many were there. A beautiful flower pillow was given by his class in school, a lovely wreath, a smaller one from Mrs. Sinnott, a beautiful oval-shaped lot of flowers containing 400 roses and many other beautiful flowers. Now, one of the questions that you have to ask yourself when you hear the story of Charlie falling out of the wagon, the ambulance that they called was the Middlesex Hospital ambulance. Middlesex Hospital had just opened the previous May, a few months before. And so you have to ask yourself, why did they take him home and stare at him while he slowly bled to death? You know, what was with that? Why didn't they take him to the hospital? So I began to try to figure out, you know, why that was. And a look back at history shows us that Charlie's injury occurred during a time of rapid flux in medicine and medical practices. So anesthesia had been introduced in 1846, and Joseph Lister introduced antiseptic surgical techniques in 1869, and this allowed surgeons to start exploring procedures that went well beyond the hasty amputations or lancing of boils that had been done before. The first U.S. appendectomy, an operation that requires you to go into the abdominal cavity, was performed in Iowa in 1885, and Connecticut's first appendectomy was performed in New Haven by Dr. William Carnault at New Haven Hospital in 1892. So I went to the Middlesex Hospital Library, and there on some shelves in a far corner are all the annual reports of Middlesex Hospital starting in 1904. And so in these reports, we get something called the head matron's report. And the one from 1904 listed the 108 patients who were admitted, their nationality, their town of origin, their occupation, their diagnosis, and then the diagnoses were grouped from the medical or surgical services. And so, you know, you can see here that, you know, the patients were from Austria, Bohemia, England, France, Germany, Holland, Ireland, Italy, Poland, Scotland, Sweden, and out of the 108, 60 were born in the United States. So we had a lot of immigrants here in Middlesex County. When you look at the diagnoses, they have them all. This is the surgical patients, and they have listed all their diagnoses from, let's see, abdominal abscess of the breast, abscess of the leg, appendicitis. So I decided to look at appendicitis because to treat somebody with appendicitis, you need to be able to do an intra-abdominal operation, which is what Charlie would have needed if he was going to be saved. So if we look at the line in 1904 for appendicitis, we see that there were a total of 4 cases, of whom 2 of them died. So that is the natural history of appendicitis. How many people here have had appendicitis? So in those days, half of you would goodbye. I had an appendectomy at age 16, so it would appear to me that at the hospital, they did not have the ability to operate on appendicitis. So you really couldn't do anything more at the hospital other than lay them in a bed and pray for the best. And most people chose to do that at home. If you were just going to put the patient to bed and hope, it would be much better if they would be at home surrounded by their loved ones than in some strange hospital. And so if you look at all the subsequent years, 1905, 1906, 1907, it's about the same thing. You have 4 or 6 patients with appendicitis, and half of them die. But then, suddenly, in 1908, something dramatic happens. The number of cases of appendicitis goes up 300% to 17 patients, and none of them die. Right? So what happened in 1908? An operating room. And so if you go on into this annual report, they announce the opening of Middlesex Hospital's operating room, and that they have trained anesthetists, and they have trained surgical nurses, and the doctors have undergone continuing education and can now operate. And so it's clear that once people understood that we don't have to just let nature take its course, at Middlesex Hospital they can do something about things like appendicitis or acute gallbladder infections or a whole list of maladies. Now people didn't stay at home. They brought their patients to the hospital for these latest modern miraculous interventions. So you went from a 50% death rate for appendicitis, which is so common, to virtually zero. So we see that tragically, Charlie Newton's accident had come just a few years before the cusp of new life-saving era surgery at nearby Middlesex Hospital. Okay, let's move on to pneumonia. Catherine Huntington Newton, the young girl standing in the center there, was born on April 19th, 1892. She was the eldest daughter of Arthur Selden Newton and Mary Rossiter Newton, living in the Newton homestead on Haddam Quarter Road, which now is known as the Shadle Farm, where Mark and the Shadle now reside. Here we see the family gathered in front of the home on their horses. Catherine is seen on the horse at left. Her parents are standing in the center. And I suppose that's Gaylord in her lap on the horse there. This is young Catherine at about age 11 or 12, probably around the time that she grabbed the reins of that runaway wagon during the episode where Charlie was fatally injured. I mean, that's really something for an 11 or 12-year-old to get a out-of-control horse and wagon under control. It really tells you something about her strength of character. Here's Catherine as a young woman, probably after she graduated from Middletown High with first honors at age 16 and attended Mount Holyoke College. After graduating from Mount Holyoke, Catherine attended a summer school at Harvard College and then entered the medical department of the Johns Hopkins University in the fall of 1913. Now, upon arriving at Johns Hopkins, in addition to starting up her medical studies, Catherine appears to have been caught up in the political tumult surrounding efforts to gain women the right to vote. And in late February, she wrote of her intention to march in the suffrage parade of March 3rd, 1913. The parents were very alarmed. The mother wrote immediately, "My dear and only daughter, your postal came to me last evening. I could hardly believe my eyes when I read, quote, have got to march in the suffrage parade at Washington next Monday, end quote. We felt that you were absorbing some ideas that you would not if you were a person of more firmness in certain lines. But we never dreamed that you would just throw yourself into a thing of that kind without giving us just one chance to admonish you and tell you that you will have a different view even from what you have now when you are a few years older. I do hope something will cause you to change your mind," and she's underlined change your mind and not go to Washington or take part in any suffrage parade before you are 21. Now, this is March of 1913. Catherine is 20 years of age. She's going to be 21 in about 6 weeks. You will lose far, far more than you can possibly gain in any way. You are a New England girl, and we hope you will make a woman that New England may be proud to own someday. But to go on a raid of this kind in nature for you will be a waste of too much strength, time, and money. Your father says it must all be a mistake. Someone has obtained an influence over you that will be neither good for you now or in the future. We shall await your next communication with intense interest. Please do not send on a postal. She doesn't want the postal service to read the business. With love and best wishes, may God protect and care for you and give you good judgment in all things. There you are, you. Do not read this, and on the outside of this envelope she says, do not read this aloud to anyone and make fun of it. Now, in spite of her parents' misgivings, Catherine did go to the March 3rd suffrage parade. This was a major political parade with 8,000 marchers, 10 bands, 26 floats, but it turned ugly as angry men, including some of the police officers who were supposed to protect them, assaulted the marchers as they tried to make their way through the heart of Washington. Finally, the Massachusetts and Pennsylvania National Guard, with some help from the boys of the Maryland Agricultural College, formed a human barrier to separate the angry mob from the marchers, who did ultimately complete their journey. Over 200 people were treated for injuries at local hospitals. The poor protection of the marchers by the police and the shocking violence against women expressing their free speech rights shocked the nation and catapulted the suffrage movement forward politically, gaining much attention and support for the movement in the weeks and months that followed. Back at home on Haddam Quarter Road, Catherine's parents were consumed with worry as they read accounts of the violence and waited for word from their daughter. On March 4th, her father Arthur wrote saying, quote, I suspect the Washington March was about as your letter represented, and that you just, quote, went with the multitude. I thought of you many times yesterday. It was so very windy. I hoped that you changed your mind and stayed in Baltimore. If you went, I fear you may be much worse for the wear today. With lots of love, I'm so anxious to hear how you withstood the weather and the doings of Tuesday. March 6th, her mother Mary writes, My dear daughter, the enclosed clippings are the only tidings of the parade which have reached us since your note on Monday morning, which was written just before you were about to start to Washington. You cannot wonder that we feel interested to know whether our only girl or any of her friends are among the injured ones, reported or not reported. We expected a postal this noon, but as none has arrived, your father has become very anxious. Has been put to question as to whether I thought Catherine could have been injured every time he has been in during the afternoon. I do hope that we will hear from you today. Be sure and tell us when you write if you were in the vicinity of the disturbance or an eyewitness. If you sustained any injury and all of the particulars. What time did you reach Jackson Place on Monday? And what is your opinion of the trip now as you look back on it? I think it's interesting when you look at these letters, people knew exactly if I put the letter, at the post office in the morning, it should get to, Washington, D.C. or New York or Boston. They knew exactly when it was supposed to arrive. And so if people wrote back, they knew that, you came back from the march, on Monday, and here it is Wednesday or Thursday, you know, we should have heard tidings from you by now. So it made them very anxious when they didn't get any kind of communication. Now, tragically, Catherine's parents' anxiety and sense of foreboding proved to be justified. Catherine was not injured during the march, but it was a very cold and windy day, and within 1 week of returning to Baltimore, she became acutely ill with pneumonia and died on March 15, 1913. Her parents were informed via telephone call from the school faculty, and 3 days later, they received a condolence letter from her grief-stricken classmates at Johns Hopkins University Medical Department, followed by a formal resolution passed in honor of Catherine by the class to express their sense of loss and to express their sympathy to her parents. March 18th, 1913. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Newton, we are feeling very sorry today that we cannot do something that might help you bear more easily the burden of your great loss. Let us assure you that in a measure we can sympathize with you. Miss Newton, in the short time she was with us, won for herself the warmest friendship of every one of us. She was always bright and cheerful, having a pleasant word for all about her. It is very difficult for us to understand just now why she was not permitted to carry to maturity the noble life she was living. But with the poet, we all feel that God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. And only too truly was it written, we live in deeds and not fears. In the short time Miss Newton was with us, her sunny smile and cheerful words and ambitious spirits have done more to brighten the lives of those around her than may be accomplished by others in many years. The remembrance of the sacrifice she made to be of service to her fellow man will ever challenge us to exert our utmost in emulation of her spirit. But you are lonesome today, and we keenly feel that we can do but little to comfort you. As a class, we framed this enclosed resolution. These few words, however, very inadequately express the feelings of our hearts. And here we see the resolution that was passed and signed by your medical school class and the faculty. Now, from the descriptions of a stressful week followed by a rapidly fatal pneumonia, it is most likely that Catherine Newton died of pneumococcal pneumonia and sepsis, an extremely common cause of sudden illness and death till the advent of antibiotics in the 1940s. In the pre-antibiotic era, pneumococcal disease was characterized by sudden onset of a high fever, shaking, chills, or rigors, and cough. Patients would be bedridden by this sudden illness, and 1/3 of them died during the crisis, and 2/3 recovered after 6 or 7 days of severe illness, followed by a long recovery that took weeks or months. The pneumococcal bacterium was first identified by Louis Pasteur, and while its high rate of lethality diminished with antibiotic so while its high rate of lethality diminished in the antibiotic era, we can see in 1999 there were still about 65,000 cases of invasive disease in children under the age of 5. However, with the introduction of the pneumococcal vaccine in 2000, the incidence of invasive pneumococcal disease in children decreased by 80% in 3 years. Similar efforts were made for adults with 2 separate vaccines given to vulnerable patients who were younger and all patients 65 and older. And so you can see in that red line the sudden steep decline in hospital admissions for invasive pneumococcal disease in the 3 years that followed the introduction of the pneumococcal vaccine. So, we can see from these stories very graphic examples that have transpired in modern medicine in the last 125 years. And it was not too long ago that people were at the mercy of various infectious diseases, simple trauma, things that they would never die of today. And I myself, when I was an intern at Middlesex Hospital in 1981, we had a pediatric ward filled with sick children. And these children were largely suffering from infectious diseases, things like pneumococcal meningitis, H-flu meningitis, pneumococcal and H-flu pneumonia and sepsis, rotavirus, dysentery, a litany of infectious diseases. And within the first 10 years of my practice, this busy ward was shut down. And the reason it was shut down was we introduced vaccines for pneumococcus and H-flu and rotavirus, and there were no sick kids. And all the community hospital pediatric wards have been shut down. I think that in our society today, there's a lot of leeriness of experts and medical authorities and corporate medicine and greedy pharmaceutical companies. And while I share some of these issues about corporate medicine and greedy pharmaceutical companies, it does not negate the hard work, 200 years of hard scientific research and work supported by our government, carried out by dedicated scientists and generations of physicians. And so I encourage all of us to be careful, to not, as they say, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, there are criticisms of modern medicine, corporatization of medicine, and the pharmaceutical industry. But if you just look at the tragedies that befell the Newton family on my street, and they were not unusual. This wasn't like some Kennedy family, like, oh my God, can you believe the terrible things? This was happening to everyone. Everyone lost children. And if you go to the cemetery, you'll see stone after stone after stone of young children. When whooping cough would come into town, everybody used to go to church and gather together in the church, and one coughing person in the church would spread whooping cough to the whole congregation, and every infant in that congregation would die within a week. And you can, if you do careful studies of gravestones, you can see the signs of diseases that we've vanquished, such as smallpox. And if any of you watched Ken Burns' documentary on the Revolutionary War, smallpox was the biggest enemy of all. I think that we all need to just have some appreciation for how fragile life was just a short while ago. I mean, I'm not that old, and I saw these really sick, deathly ill kids, and you look at these folks and the heartache that they had. And even though death was common, each one of these deaths really just broke people's hearts. And you could hear in J.E.'s letters, how he suffered, and how you can imagine Catherine's parents, how heart-struck they were. So, in all, I think I'm just really glad that I'm alive in 2026. Thank you very much. any questions?
Was Catherine brought back here for burial?
Yep. She's right there in the county spot.
Okay.
I just suggest, this is such a great presentation, I wish we could put it on video for people who couldn't make it to the see.
Well, as it happens, this medical talk was sort of came out of some research I did when I made a movie about the history of Haddam Quarter Road. And, so you can find that on YouTube. It's called Haddam Quarter Voices. It's a little long, it's about 90 minutes, but this portion of it probably takes up 20 or 30 minutes.
And there's a great book I read a couple years ago called Plagues in the Nation that goes through each of these diseases nationally and goes through like what was kind of some of the types of information you were giving, as well as the political response to it based on what we did and didn't understand about the cause of the diseases. And we talked about like shotgun quarantines and things like that. And I really recommend it. I'm very interested in reading further.
Hi, I was wondering, my mother used to tell me that people used to put their babies outside in the winter on the porches, all bundled up for their naps so that their fresh air would make them healthy. Is that because of the tuberculosis, you think?
Well, it very may have been a tradition. I mean, for much of human history, especially before germs were recognized in the mid-1800s, it was thought that illness was caused by bad air, and so our houses, especially in colder areas, they're very shut up tight. They've got these little windows, and they're burning fires, and the air inside the houses, the air quality was pretty bad. So it's not, it's not entirely wrong. You can imagine an asthmatic kid living in a colonial house with fireplaces going in every room. It might have done him some good to be put out on the porch. Ron.
In the Department of Public Health, they still have a registry for TB. What I was told is TB attacks people who do not have a strong immune system, and that most people have the TB virus in them, or bacteria in them, but it is subdued because of their immune system.
This is true. Today, if you look at an American today, we're these big, hulking humans, If you look at the records of, let's say, Civil War or Revolutionary War soldiers, they're these skinny little runts. And a lot of them were not in good health. When you look at the medical reports of Revolutionary War or Civil War soldiers, they have rotten teeth, they broke a leg and it didn't mend right, they are coughing and wheezing. So today, we are very, very well nourished. We're overnourished. But that gives us the strength to fight the tuberculosis bacterium, and we wall it off. And so the body will form a capsule and keep the TB germs trapped in that capsule. And as long as you're healthy, your body can keep the prisoner at bay. But even today, if you become chronically ill or your immune system is suppressed, then the TB can break out. So during the HIV epidemic, the AIDS epidemic, We also had a resurgence of tuberculosis because we had, hundreds of thousands of people who may have had latent TB in their lungs, who now had suppressed immune systems, and the bacteria came out. And all those TV commercials that you see for all these miracle cures for psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis, and they're all using these monoclonal antibodies as biologics to suppress the immune system. And every one of them have a warning about latent hepatitis, that you have to get tested for TB before you can use any of these drugs. So yes, Ron, there's a good amount of truth to that.
On that same note about nutrition, what was the healthy diet back in the time when tuberculosis was rampant? And was vitamin C discovered soon after that, so that people have had vitamins as part of healing?
Well, vitamin C was sort of discovered by the navies. The British Navy discovered vitamin C because vitamin C deficiency caused a disease called scurvy. And people's hair would fall out, their teeth would fall out, their skin would tear. And these sailors, especially, they got becalmed in the middle of the ocean, and all they had to eat was hardtack and salt pork. They had no fresh fruits or vegetables. And it was learned that as soon as the ships got some fresh produce, that scurvy suddenly went away, and a British naval surgeon figured out that if you gave the sailors a lime once a month, it would prevent scurvy. So that's why the British Navy sailors are called limeys. Now the German Navy, they used sauerkraut for the source of vitamin C, so the Germans are called krauts. In the sanitariums, they just got enough calories. They probably actually got some meat, which was not that usual for many poor people's diet. So they just got enough calories that their immune system had the energy to fight. I don't think it was really a matter of vitamins as much as it was just basic fuel to fight the battle.
I was curious about how the cattle were picking it up from the environment, the TB. Is it that prevalent in general? Are cattle immunized against it now, or where did it come from? From the animal side.
Well, I think the animals spread it the same way that humans did it. They're mammals, they've got lungs, they've got warm-blooded beings. I actually don't know whether the cattle get sick from TB or if they're just carriers. But, there's a lot of diseases that, like right now, we're very, very worried about avian flu, which started in the chicken flocks and now has moved to our dairy herds. And so we have a big problem with avian flu, which sometimes when farmers or farmhands are handling or milking cows or taking care of chickens, they catch avian flu. And avian flu in humans, of the recorded cases, has a 50% death rate. So we're very, very worried about this, and the medical community is in particular very alarmed and wants the government to do more to protect us from yet another pandemic.
I would like to point out or question the contradiction of tuberculosis being treated by putting out in the cold, but pneumonia being caught by being out in the cold. So which is better for us?
I don't think that you don't catch anything from being out in the cold. But sometimes if you're stressed and your immune defenses are low, it makes you more vulnerable, so that it's a lot of times like, you look at it, let's take a look at like mono, all right? So that's caused by the Epstein-Barr virus, and that's all around us all the time, and most of us don't catch it until we're teenagers, all right? And classically, you catch it after you've had a breakup with your boyfriend or girlfriend. That's when I got mine. You know? And so there's a certain point where your immune system is suppressed because you're so traumatized and over the loss of your love, and that's the time when the Epstein-Barr virus seems to be able to make us sick. So I think a lot of these germs are circulating around, always, and it's partially a matter of when we're susceptible to them. And one of the things that's so miraculous about vaccines is that we take a piece of protein from one of these deadly killers like smallpox or whooping cough or measles, and we present it to the immune system like a mugshot. And we're basically, when we're injecting this into the arm, we're telling the immune system, look for this. If you see it again, get it. And don't let it take hold. Because it usually takes our immune system a full week to develop a response to an attack from a germ. And for some of these diseases, like smallpox, you don't have a week. A week, you're dead. And so what vaccines do is they give the immune system a big head start and the ability to recognize and destroy a pathogen before it has a chance to really invade.
Was it pricey to go to the sanitarium, or did it only the well-to-do, or was everybody fair?
I do get the feeling that it was pricey. I mean, there was one of the problems that I've often wondered about is who took care of the farm. I mean, they had these, they had fields, they had animals, and here JE, from November through March, is tending to his dying life and away from the farm. So it must have been a real burden on the extended family who had to pick up. I mean, there wasn't a lot of slack in their lives, and so you can imagine the hardship of somebody going away and having to take over their farming duties. From my reading, it seemed like there was, a considerable expense to these sanitariums, and so they had different levels. They were called dispensaries for the poor people, and then sanitariums for the middle class, and spas for the wealthy. But I do think it was a financial hardship.
Just a comment, great talk. You can go to Saranac Lake, and the Trudeau Institute is there, and they're still doing some science, but they also have a museum, so you can check it all out and learn the history of it. And a lot of people in the town would actually make porches just so they can have patients there and make some money from sanitation. So it was a real business. The other comment I have is there's also another really good book called Tuberculosis Everywhere that's out recently that talks a lot about tuberculosis. And basically the fight now, I think, is that it's become resistant to a lot of antibiotics, so it's harder to kill.
Yeah, no, it's one of the problems with treating TB is that you need to take the medications for months, and you have to take it, with dedication. And so if people, let's say, you're somebody who doesn't have good access to medical care or money, or your life is screwed up because you're a drug addict or something, and they don't complete the course of antibiotics, then the germs that come resurgent back are now resistant to those antibiotics.
The Historical Society has books for sale, and then we have a lot of items at the 250 table that we are trying to raise money to continue these programs and to fund a lot of the other events that we have coming up. So thank you all for coming out.